is today? 6.
7.
Today's 7.
No, today's the 8th. No, tomorrow's the 8th. This is the 7th.
Right? Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you for coming today to the Civil War Heritage Foundation's guest speaker presentations. My name is Julie Decker. I'm from Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, and what I'm going to speak to you about today is the role of the Catholic Sisters in the Civil War. This is a role that really many people are not quite familiar with, and further than that, it is interesting to look at the impact as far as a society element is concerned as to what the sisters did during the time of the Civil War. But before we get there, we're going to go back a little bit in time and talk about this particular order itself. This particular order is the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. It was started in France by St. Vincent de Paul and Louise Marillac on and around 1630. The attire, or the habit with which I am in today, is that of the original order as it progressed in France. Now, the interesting part about this order is simply this. Many Catholic religious orders at that time were cloistered or otherwise kept within the walls of the church, of the sanctuary of the church, and did not mingle out and amongst the public. Herein lies the difference with the Daughters of Charity. The Daughters of Charity were mandated, as per her founders, to be out and amongst the poor of France at that point in time. So that was really a novel idea at the time, that they were no longer cloistered behind the walls of an abbey or a convent. And the attire that I wear is first off, we'll start with the coronet. The coronet was made out of Belgian linen, very, very heavily starched Belgian linen. The color is somewhere between a navy and a French blue, depending upon what district of the order that one was in. It would range anywhere from this color to that of a very, very dark navy. It is constructed of wool, and we would really basically wear all of the underpinnings that the ladies of the day would wear. And we are attired, of course, in black shoes. The difference between the sisters and the ladies of the day, our underpinnings were all black. And we, of course, wore a rosary on our left side, which was engaged and put together with green ribbon. Now, with that said, green ribbon is the sign, green is the color of hope. So therefore, in the mission of the order, we indeed spread hope amongst the very poor of the communities with which we served. So let's fast forward a couple hundred years to where we are about 1850. The underpinnings of secession and states' rights are just at this point in time about brewing. They haven't gotten to their boiling point yet. But what the interesting part about this is the time that there was a political party around the 1840s who came into play in this country. It was called the Know Nothing Party, or the American Party. What their focus was not so much of a Democratic point of view or a Republican conservative point of view. It was that of a very, very anti-immigrant opinion. So with that said, we are still in the 19th century. Women have yet to gain the vote. Women are still viewed as being very subservient in society. Plus, we have now, around 1840, 1850, the large influx of immigrants, particularly Irish immigrants, due to the hands of the famine that occurred in Ireland, coming to this country. It really almost made a perfect storm for the immigrant, for the Catholic immigrant, for the female Catholic immigrant, and for the female Catholic immigrant who was in the service of the church. All of those which were non-accepted at the time in this country. Those Catholic sisters were very looked down upon, as were the priests. I would like to say, due to their efforts, but I cannot find any true documentation at this point in time, but I would like to say because of their unselfish efforts during the time of the Civil War that they changed the outlook and the opinion of many in this country due to their unselfish caring of those who fought in blue or those that fought in gray, whether they were Catholic, whether they were Protestant, whether they had any religion at all, whether they were wealthy or whether they were poor. You see, the mission of the Daughters of Charity was not to be religious or politically specific. It was that as to what we are charged in the Gospel of Matthew. For the least that you do unto my brethren, you do unto me. And they carried that charge very, very close to their heart. And thusly then, we've set the stage for how these Catholic sisters how these Catholic sisters played such a major role in the Civil War. We've heard about Mother Bickerdike. We've heard about Clara Barton, who I might add was never a nurse. She was a social worker in modern terminology. But with that said, these ladies are well known for their efforts during the Civil War. The Catholic sisters are not. Now, coming from a long background of nursing, we need to understand that formal nursing schools did not evolve in this country until post-Civil War, roughly 1870, depending upon what source you read. So with that said, nursing in this country at that time was just basically a passing down of remedies and treatments from mother to daughter. The males did not nurse initially. But during the early days of the war, men were the first nurses. So as the battles progressed and became more expansive over the East Coast, the army of both the Confederacy and the Union Army called upon these nurses. Now here's where your point of interest it comes into play. In Europe, there were formal nursing schools. So as I said, many religious people in this country, mainly the sisters or the nuns, whichever you wanted to call them, came to this country already trained to be nurses. So their training and their efforts were widespread very early in the war. Right after Fort Sumter, they started to call, the respective governments in this country started to call for nurses, and they wanted the Daughters of Charity mainly. Depending upon what text you read, there were between 12 to 14 different orders who were already here in this country, but the Daughters of Charity had the largest representation during the Civil War. The call went out for the Daughters of Charity. They came and they answered the call, and they continued to answer the call. They were hospital administrators, they were cooks, they were laundresses, they were women who wrote very, very sad letters home. They became companions to a lot of these soldiers who were living and dying, unfortunately, in the hospitals during the time of the Civil War. So we're going to fast forward a couple years to Gettysburg. The days prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, the end of June, 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th, St. Joseph Convent is a mere 8 miles south of where we are right now. And during that time, as the armies were coming into this battleground of Gettysburg, interestingly enough, the South traveled north to get to Gettysburg, and the North traveled south to get to Gettysburg. So they came in opposite directions, and it all culminated in this very small little farm town of Gettysburg. We know the battle statistics. We know what happened here. But in the days following Gettysburg, we're not so astute on that aspect. On July the 4th, after the barrage and cannonade of Pickett's charge, which was heard on the grounds of Emmitsburg, Mother Mary Simone and Father Francis Orlando decided that they needed first aid, they needed nursing, they needed care here in the town of Gettysburg. So on July the 5th, 1863, they boarded a buckboard and they came across this very road where we are standing right here into the center of town. For those of you that are familiar with Gettysburg, where the circle is, and the very large modern housing place, I believe it's called the Best Western, is stationed there. There's a small brick tavern to its right called McClellan's Tavern. That is where the sisters were stationed. Yes, they were stationed at a tavern. And with that said, these horseless carriages that run up and down this street. With that said, they widely dispersed throughout the communities of Gettysburg. The particular daughter of charity that I portray is Sister Camilla O'Keefe. Sister Camilla was, of course, by her last name, an Irish immigrant. She came here as a very, very young child and entered the religious life as a young lady of about 14 is when she started her formal lessons and education in that. And she came up, she was through the first wave of the Daughters of Charity that came here. They met some of the most horrific sights and smells that these ladies have ever seen in their life. Fortunately for us, Sister Camilla wrote a diary. And I have some excerpts in her words of what they saw as they were at the very edge of this town. So I'm going to read a little bit from that diary so that it might illustrate for you what they saw as they came into this country. This entry is dated July the 5th, 1863. Father Burlando and Mother decided that some sisters had better go up to Gettysburg. So the omnibus was made ready and baskets of things, bandages, sponges, clothing, and refreshments for the wounded. Father got the carriage, taking 2 sisters with him and 14 in the omnibus as off they started. On reaching within 2 miles of Gettysburg, the road was blockaded by some trees that had been cut down and put down across the road. On the side were a group of pickets who ran toward the fence with uplifted muskets. But no sooner did they see the omnibus and the sisters and fathers in front of them, they put down their muskets. Father tied a white handkerchief on the end of his cane and walked up to the pickets. This white flag was representative of that of the flag of truce. The men talked for a few minutes with Father, and then in a few minutes the blockade was removed and our driver beckoned to drive on. As we passed, the pickets lifted their caps and bowed, showing their pleasure in seeing the sisters going up to attending to the suffering. But upon reaching the battleground, awful to see the men lying dead on the road, some by the side of their horses. It was beyond description. Hundreds of both armies lying dead, almost in the tracks that the driver had to be careful so as to pass over the bodies. The picture of human suffering, slaughtered by their fellow men in a cruel civil war, was so terrible. The battlefield, a very extensive space on either side of the road. The east was Meade Stand and the west was Longstreet. On both sides, men were digging pits and putting the bodies down by the dozens. One newly made pit contained 50 bodies of Confederates. In this frightful condition, we found the battlefield of that fearful battle of Gettysburg. After creeping along for some time, we arrived in the town, and we were fearful of the excitement of the federal officers, sorry enough that Longstreet and his army should have escaped being their prisoners. All those officers who had been at St. Joseph's were very glad to see Father and the sisters. We kept on until reaching McClellan's Hotel. The parlors of the hotel were immediately given to the sisters for their use. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So long did it take to reach there, having to go so slowly, especially passing by the battleground where the wounded men had just been wounded. She goes on to talk about the different venues with which the sisters went to nurse the wounded. Interestingly enough, when they got to the Lutheran seminary, there was a sign, "Nurses this way." They went into the deep part of the woods on the other side of town, and there they found anywhere from 600 to 700 soldiers who were in the woods and could not get out. They were teeming with lice, they were malnourished, they were dehydrated, and they started their work. Now, they dispersed amongst the 14 of them that came. They dispersed. Sister Camilla was at a Methodist hospital, and from that comes a rather funny and really a rather amusing story. In looking at Sister Camilla's life and physical descriptions of her, and actually a real picture of her, she really was not near as tall as I am. But I think she sported still a rather fiery Irish temper. Sister Camilla went to the Army quartermaster in the middle of town. As I said, she was stationed at the Methodist Hospital, which today is the GAR Hall. It is still, the building still exists, in use for that purpose. But she went to the quartermaster with a nurse, or with a note in mind, and said, "Sir, I am in need of bandages, beef broth, shoes, blankets, and so on and so forth." And he looked at the list and he said, "That's fine, sister. I will make sure that those are all, your accommodations are met, and I will have the men load it and send it to the Catholic hospital, which is down on High Street." She felt that he may have misunderstood what she was saying, and she clarified her statement with him, and he again did not listen to what she was saying, and found herself in rather a verbal sparring match with this quartermaster. And the quartermaster pounded his right fist on his desk, and he said, "Sister, the Methodist Church does not have nuns." While turning on her heel, imagine this, someone that's probably about 5 inches shorter than I am, with a fiery Irish temper, turned on her left heel and in her very best Northern Irish brogue, looked him square in the face and said to him, "Sir, today they do." So with that said, when she went back to the Methodist hospital, not only did she find everything there, stacked accordingly, and quite neatly, I might add. So even at that point in time, the lesson learned always is that you don't mess with the sisters. That's really a rather amusing story in a very, very tragic environment. Along Baltimore Street, one of probably the saddest stories I think that I have heard was that of Sister Serena Kemlenowitz. And Sister Serena had not seen her brother for on towards 3 years. He fought for the Union side of Maryland. And he was over and severely shot and injured on Culp's Hill on the first day's fighting. And Sister Serena had ended up in one of the homes on Baltimore Street nursing the wounded, and they brought a young man in. Now we're talking 3 to 4 days after the battle, and she washed this young man's face, and much to her horror, it was her brother Thaddeus. So she nursed Thaddeus as best as she could here and got him stabilized. He was subsequently then transferred to Slattery Hospital in Philadelphia, where unfortunately he succumbed to infection, which many of our soldiers did at the time of the Civil War. During also the time we're going to turn back just a little bit to Mother Bickerdike and Clara Barton and Dorothea Dix. All of 3 of whom I will tell you were very, very upset that the Catholic sisters were brought into the healthcare delivery system of the Union and Confederate Army. They were very, very anti-Catholic. And were not quiet about it either. They went and complained to Washington, to the powers that be in Washington, who fortunately it fell upon a deaf ear, because both President Lincoln and President Jefferson Davis were very, very favorable for these nurses to help with the sick and the dying. So they really got nowhere with it, but particularly Mother Bickerdike and Dorothea Dix were very, very anti-Catholic. So with that said, there was some controversy. She would have thrown them out of her hospitals had it not been for the generals in the medical department and Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Davis. So unfortunately, we still have that and had that discrimination, even at that point in time. But think at the time, as I spoken to earlier, about the massive immigrant influx. There were fun times. The sisters, one of the sisters at the Lutheran Seminary, seems that a Confederate private and a Union private got into, shall we say, fisticuffs. And when the brawl was all said and done with, one of the sisters had the Confederate soldier under her right foot and the Union soldier under her right wrist, pinned against the wall. But with that said, much of the discrimination, the potential discrimination, came from the fact that Dorothea Dix felt that the reason why, one of the big reasons why she did not want the Catholic nuns or sisters in her hospitals was the fact that she was very fearful that they were there for only conversion, only for religious conversion. That's all she was worried about, that they were on a mission to massively convert these Protestant or agnostic soldiers into Catholicism. In doing the research for this character portrayal, such was not the case. There is plain documentation out there that conversion was not the issue. It was, as I said, what we are charged in the Gospel of Matthew. For the least that you do unto me, or for the least that you do unto my brethren, you do unto me. That was the beginning and the end of the statement of their mission. There was no number counting to find out how many that were converted. Although, did it happen? Yes, it did. It happened quite frequently, but it was of the own volition of the soldier to do that. There were many soldiers, many accounts of soldiers who were of various Protestant denominations that on their deathbed, they either fully requested for conversion or they wanted baptized. There were many that were never baptized. And there was one particular young man from a Massachusetts regiment who had never been baptized. His parents were Episcopalian, but he felt at the time of his wounding and subsequent unfortunate death that he needed to be baptized. They called for the Protestant clergy to come. The Protestant clergy came, and he asked for one of the Daughters of Charity to witness his baptism. His reason being was he wanted to make sure it was done right. So with that said, I'll certainly open up to any questions at all. It's very much, I'm asked numerous times why I do this particular portrayal. Simply because I come from a very long line of Irish women, not quite as feisty as Sister Camilla, but pretty close to it. I am of the Catholic faith, and I am a nurse by profession, so I think I really didn't have anything else that I could have been.
And it's one of these side stories that nobody knows.
Right, exactly. Mrs. Stewart very deftly brought the fact that not a lot of people know the importance of the role of the Catholic sister. And with them coming from Europe, as I said, with the knowledge base that they possessed because they were formally trained, they brought a lot of very interesting practices to this country that we didn't know about because, communications from one side of the pond to the other was rather slow at that point in time. But it is a very interesting character to portray. I teach nursing at a college in Pennsylvania, and I have yet, although I think this is going to be the debut year, I'm going to teach the first class, Clad in the Habit, and we'll see what happens. It could be a bit of an interesting situation, but it is very important, as all reenactors possess this philosophy. This is our way of showing our profound gratitude to those who have come before us, to those that have died in the service of this country, so that we can come here 149 years later in hopes that we do well by them, to thank them for what they have done for each and every one of us and made this country the greatest country that there ever is on the face of this earth. It didn't come easy. We've done a lot of things wrong, but we have done many things right. So therefore, it truly is a great honor and a privilege for me to come here today to just give you a little bit of an insight as to what and how this unknown group of women, the profound effect that they have. Any questions? Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
How many sisters were there here?
Originally, there were 14 from Emmitsburg, but then the call went out to the different other orders that were also here. But the predominant and your biggest number came from Emmitsburg. And so much so, that's actually a very good question. During the war, they were so far spread to the north. Well, obviously, this was the farthest north that they went, but the different mother houses were spread throughout. There was New York, there was Emmitsburg, there was one in Chicago, and there was also one down south. They were spread very thin that they really did not have enough of teachers for their schools because the sisters were put out to nurse. And they worked in field hospitals such as Gettysburg. They also worked in the general hospitals in Washington, D.C., in Richmond. They were at Antietam. They were at Point Lookout. Just trying to remember very off the top of my head. They were really basically, I would be very safe in saying that any major battle engagement, the Daughters of Charity were there. Yes. Yes, sir.
Has the church looked at any of these women to elevate their status?
You mean sainthood?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a candidate for that. No, I'm just kidding. No. My application, I think, fell in file 13. Yes, that's true. No, actually, the church has not, to my knowledge, felt that the efforts, albeit necessary to be recognized, and it is recognized through the annals of the American church, absolutely. But as far as elevating any of them to the status of a saint or no, not to my knowledge. Not to say it might not happen futuristically, but to my knowledge, no. But really and truly, they saved so many lives. And they comforted so many at the time of their death as well. So maybe we should start a movement to have them all canonized. I don't know. There's a rather large and impressive monument in Washington, D.C. I think it's around Connecticut Avenue, if I remember correctly. In the 1920s, one of the senators from New Hampshire or New York, I'm not sure on that, felt the need to recognize the role of the Catholic sister in the Civil War. So there is a very big bronze statue in that area, and has the relief of all the different orders who represent of all the orders that served during the Civil War. Any questions? Any other questions? Does Fritz have any questions?
I grew up with the nuns. But Catholic hospitals I grew up in as well.
Right.
So my grandmother was a nurse at the hospital. My mother graduated from St. Francis. My sister graduated from the Cambridge. But the Catholic hospital has really gone, it's not there anymore. The sisters aren't there anymore.
It is. It's a tragedy. Through time, people are not entering the religious service. We have the issues with not enough of priests. We don't have enough of sisters to teach in our Catholic school systems. I think I would be hard pressed to find a lot of school systems who maybe only have a couple a couple sisters that actually teach. There are none in our areas that actually have teaching sisters in the system anymore. It's a sad fact of society, and I think again, this is only my opinion of the matter, but I think when they modernized and they stopped wearing the habits, that reverence and that awe kind of went away a little bit with it. The respectful fear, yes, that's very good, Mrs. Stewart. Yes, the respectful fear has gone away. But then again, I think that's only my opinion of that. But during the 1960s when they started to modernize the habit, and they don't wear the full habits anymore. I think we that was the start of the decline, very much so.
There's no more the 2-year nursing schools that they used to run. They're not around anymore.
Diploma nursing schools are becoming a thing of the past. In Pennsylvania, I'm trying to gather here. I'm a product of a diploma school, and then went on for an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, and a soon-to-be doctoral degree. But diploma schools and Catholic training schools are really, there's only a handful of them left in the Commonwealth. I don't know about nationwide, but I think probably that trend is the same throughout the nation. It seems to be that hospitals have the opinion that better prepared nurses are those that have the baccalaureate degree. They want to move into mandated entry level as being a baccalaureate degree, which is a 4-year degree. And for some people that is very feasible, but for other people it isn't. So it's interesting. But the Catholic hospitals are also becoming a thing of the past, and it is because of the monetary issues. Healthcare is not cheap, as we all know, and with the various sundry of reasons, they don't have the monetary background that they once did. And people are more, I don't want to say people are less religious today than they were, say, 40 years ago, but I think the tag onto the religious identity is not as strong as what it was 40 and 50 years ago and prior to that, because it was, sometimes close to a cardinal sin for a Catholic to go to a Protestant general hospital. It just didn't work that way. People ask me quite frequently when I'm out if I am a real Catholic nun. After I get done raucously laughing, I tell them no. If I was, the Roman Catholic Church would never be the same again. No, I do wear it. This is one of those issues, I think, with reenactors, that we try to be 100% historically accurate. That's what we strive for. But for me, now we have the issue of, in this role, as being the Catholic sister, with the wedding ring issue. Okay? There are some orders who will wear their wedding ring on their left hand. This order does not. It wears it on its right hand. But still, in my humanness, I have been married for almost 23 years, and that ring has not been removed since the day it was put on. So I leave it there. Could I put a Band-Aid over it? I could. Could I paint it with some type of like a flesh color? Kind of defeats the purpose. I think that's a little extreme. Yes, and Johnson & Johnson were not in business at the time of the Civil War. So therefore, really technically, I probably should go get a very inexpensive silver band and wear it on my right hand. But, try as we must, how about it, ladies, to be 100% historical accurate. We need to sometimes let that little bit of modern influence come through. But are there any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for your time, for your attention, and as I said, it's a great role to portray, because there just is not a whole lot known about it, and I think these ladies truly should be far more recognized than what they really are, and for that I am very proud to represent them in the modern day. Thank you.